Good evening, trendsetters. We got a bit more of question and answers this evening. This is a response to Glitter Girl's question on my previous video. Her two main questions were basically, how do you see the Torah approving or referring to a vegetarian diet? How do you reconcile veganism with the Torah-based Judaism? And also, what is up with the Torah's constant reference to the consumption of wine and or bread? And is that healthy? How do we reconcile that with what is healthy? So first question first, Torah and vegetarianism. It's my opinion that based on the text of the Torah, the primary diet that's actually mandated for man is a plant-based diet, as we'll come to Bereshis, Genesis 1:29, my Bar Mitzvah Parasha, and I'll read from that in a moment. And also that overall Judaism and the Jewish people have traditionally, historically been an agricultural based society, deeply connected with the land, deeply connected with the movement and change in the seasons and the harvest time, which is connected to the 7 species and all the plants. So plants, agriculture, plant-based diet are very heavily referred to in Torah Judaism, and generally whenever meat's mentioned in the Bible, typically it's linked with problematic issues, as we'll come to. Maybe if I can touch on that. I don't know if I don't want to wrap it on in this video. I had a very long video last video. Somebody told me, your videos are too long, mate. Anyway, and so that's my answer on Torah and vegetarianism. But let's go to the text first. I always like to quote chapter and verse. So chapter and verse here, got my Gutnik Chumash here, and we're on 129. And let's read from the source. It says here, Vayomer Elokim, God said, Hinei natati lachem et kol esef zorei zara, asher al pnei kol haaretz vet kol ha'etz asher bo pri etz zorei zara lachem yeh le'ochla. So God said, I have hereby given you every plant that reproduces by seed that is upon the surface of the entire earth, and every tree that is seed-bearing fruit. They shall be food for you. So this is the biblically mandated vegetarian, plant-based, vegan diet. I would challenge anybody else to come and point to me a place in the Torah where it says clearly what you should be eating, When it comes to the idea of people being able to eat meat and shecht it outside of sacrifices, the verse there is V'chi ta'avat nafshecha, when your soul has a taiva, has a desire or a lust, if it will. And I mentioned that in another video I made, the idea of taiva, which is a lust or desire, which is based on oineg, pleasure, and where do you draw your pleasure from? And a taiva is not necessarily a very positive thing. A lust or a desire is not necessarily a positive thing. So the diet right off the bat in the Chumash, the diet from the Garden of Eden of primordial man and woman is a plant-based diet, and that's what Rav Kook was getting at with, his idea of, he adopted a vegetarian diet, and saying ultimately that's where we're going to return to. If we look at the text of the Navi, of Isaiah, of talking about, when we're going to return to the land and we're going to rest under the fig tree, and this is an idea of coming really to our roots as a people. We're very much connected with the seasons, all of the chagim, all of the festivals kind of parallel the harvest cycle. Sukkot is what Chag HaKatzir, Chag HaAsif, and when we harvest and when we bring it in and when we plant, it's all about the seasons. Pesach has to be in the spring. It's all about growth, and I think we as a people have forgotten that kind of connection. We had 2,000 odd years of exile. We've had a bit of a disconnect from the land and from nature and from being in touch with our roots, excuse the pun. And I think it's little wonder then perhaps why in Israel there's such a high uptake of the vegan lifestyle. I think it's not only to do with that we're Rahmanim, B'nai Rahmanim, we're the merciful sons of merciful, descendants of merciful, that it runs literally in our DNA, our physical DNA. I think it's also got to do with kind of the messianic thing about it. I think this, the diet that will lead to less suffering and greater harmony, better environmental outcomes is a vegan diet. And I think also it's got to do with the people who are living in Israel are more in touch with the kind of being in touch with living on the land and owning land and having land and tilling the land and working the land, which is something that due to persecution and displacement, the Jewish people historically in recent chapters of history were somewhat disconnected from. So that's just some food for thought. And so looking at the text, we're big into the 7 species. Chitao Sarah, Geffen Te'ena, Rimon Zait V'Tamar, all these things, the species of produce linked to the land of Israel, plants, fruits, vegetables, grains, the seasons, the seasonality linked to the Chagim, all these things kind of point to a very, very ecologically friendly Torah, which we somewhat are becoming disconnected from. And that's because I'm assuming you're a Western Jew, we adopt, in a way, the culture of the our surroundings, and also along with that comes the excess that is the Western lifestyle, due to basically economic vibrance and economic wealth. We're able to go to the supermarket and pick up meat in a beautiful styrofoam container, and that's actually very easy, and therefore meat doesn't become only about Shabbat, it becomes about every meal of the week, almost every night meal. And historically, for religious people who were keeping kosher, if we ask our grandparents, what was it like to get kosher meat? Was it easy? Was it difficult? It wasn't so easy. Up to even 30-40 years ago, most people actually had to go to the butcher, buy the meat, and then take it home and salt it and soak it to get rid of the blood. So it was actually a koshering process that many people had to do at home to actually get the kosher meat. It was slaughtered, kosher, was butchered, but then it had to be koshered further through salting and soaking. And that wouldn't have been easy, so it was a lot more inconvenient. It was also a lot more expensive. Developments have brought the price down and accessibility up so that you can walk into a 24-hour 7, excuse the light, I gotta get the good lighting, 24/7 grocery and get your styrofoam packed sirloin steaks or whatever and chuck them on the barbie. So that's, historically, that hasn't ever really happened up until recently, and then that's through that Western diet and the Western lifestyle has infiltrated Jewish lifestyle. Meat would have only been really something for the Sabbath or Yom Tovim, that traditionally, and it wouldn't have been so easy to come by. There would have been a lot of process in that. And there's opinions that say, look, the ideas behind kashrut is actually to make it difficult for us to eat meat, because maybe it's something that is a concession to human frailty rather than something that's really endorsed and approved of. Again, coming to the idea of there's issues with meat consumption, we look at the Slav in the desert, the children of Israel, Bnei Israel, desired meat, they longed for meat, they were chaking Hashem, going, we want some meat. And then the Slav came and we had big issues then. That was in the Midbar, in the desert. Other issues there of the rebellious son who has to steal a certain amount of money from his parents and then go spend it on what? Go spend it on meat and eat meat. So meat can be problematic in some areas of life. And there's also a lot of criticism, and you can look at a number of sources of even butchers. The butchers really need to work on themselves spiritually to, as it were, atone for the fact that they're taking life. Not so simple. It's in a Mishnah somewhere, and it's also talked about, I believe, in the Kutei Deburim and some other Chabad Hasidic sources. But it's not such a simple thing to be a shofet, to be a ritual slaughterer. So that's that. We're going on in 8 minutes, so I really hope I'm not rabbiting on here. Not rabbit on, love, rabbit on. That's a Castle reference. That's an Australian movie reference. Excuse me. So coming down to the second question, which is of bread and wine, and is it healthy? Is it not healthy? This is a tough one because it all comes down to what is your definition of healthy. There's different schools of thought, of course. Dr. Michael Greger has an interesting thing, which is that it's all a relative reference, like what's healthy and what's healthier. So for him, potatoes are healthy, yes, but sweet potatoes are healthier. So he'll eat sweet potatoes over potatoes. So it's about opportunity cost, as it were. If you eat something, you could have eaten something else in its stead, and you've got that lost opportunity. So bread, it is calorically dense, that's true. If you're trying to lose some kilos, I'm trying to lose the last few kilos, maybe you shouldn't be eating bread all the time, because it's quite calorically dense. You're probably looking 2, 3, 4 calories per gram, which is not going to help your case. Whereas if you're eating less refined carbohydrates and starches like oats, like potatoes, sweet potatoes, like corn, you're looking at less than 1 calorie per gram, around 0.7-ish. So I don't necessarily think bread per se is unhealthy. Of course, you're getting really processed white bread with margarine and oil and stuff. That's not good. If you're baking it at home with some wholemeal organic or sprouted bread, sprouted Ezekiel bread, which we can all get now, that's a lot healthier, of course. And we only have to eat on Friday night, Shabbos lunch, and maybe Seudah Shlishit, depending on your custom, and then Yom Tov. So you're talking about 2 to 3 servings of bread a week, and then plus a bit more for Yom Tovim. That's not the end of the world. Really, that's not going to kill you. And the only real thing is the caloric density in my view. Otherwise, it's an inherently healthy plant-based food. If you're getting healthy, at least as least refined as possible, maybe even some sourdough bread. You can follow on Instagram our friend Mariasha. She does some really amazing sourdough bread. Now, wine, you don't need to drink wine. You can have grape juice if you're worried about the alcohol. Otherwise, wine is quite rich in antioxidants. Miyain yotze sod. From wine comes out the secrets. Kind of opens us up a bit, which is perhaps what we need to do on Shabbat and Chagim. But again, you can abstain from the alcohol and have the grape juice, which is what we do because we've got kids. I'll give them grape juice. And so just opt for that. And of course, if you get a lot of discomfort physically for whatever reason from wine, or you've got some allergy to some additives or ingredients or grapes, then perhaps, of course, talk to your local Orthodox rabbi. You can have you can either make kiddush on the bread, or you can make kiddush on a different beverage. Doesn't need to be wine. So that's the idea. Coming back to it, I think though wine's got antioxidants, got a lot of positives. So I think we need to understand that the Torah says we can have certain things, but that doesn't mean we should have them in excess. We could overdose on carrots and turn orange. We could overdose on apricot kernels. We could overdose on apple cores and all kinds of things. Too much of anything, too much water. If we drink too much water, you can actually kill yourself. So overhydrate, which is very, very difficult to do, but it's doable. So just because something is authorized and encouraged and healthy, but in the right quantity. So we've got to have das, we've got to have the right intellect to do things properly. And of course, referring to science, referring to what is the modern wisdom, the chokhmah that's out in the world, and we have an obligation to use that chokhmah to live the life as best we can. I've referred to that into the Rambam video. The Rambam video I made, I said at the end of the day, chapter 4, Hilchos De'ot, Rambam towards the end says, look, I've outlined my diet, but if you've lived a lifestyle that hasn't been so good, then you've got to live to the prevailing information that's out there, scientific information that's out there, and that's what you should be doing, that's what you should be following. And it's my opinion that on balance, the science that's out there, I don't need to rabbit on all the doctors that are out there, but all the studies out there, the China study, the Adventist study, the Blue Zone study, Dr. Michael Greger, Dr. McDougall, Dr. T. Colin Campbell, Esselstyn, all these guys. The vegan plant-based diet prevents disease and reverses disease, leads to longevity, which is really, ultimately, we have to do this, v'chai b'hem, to live by them, because I want to live as long as possible to do my role in this world and to dance at my grandchildren and great-grandchildren's weddings. And it's not going to happen. The odds aren't in my favour if I'm going to eat a very rich meat and animal product-based diet. That's just not going to happen. Statistically, there's a greater probability of me running into severe health issues if I eat that stuff than if I abstain from that and have a plant-based vegan diet. So that's why I do it. And then, of course, it's ecologically better, and it's also nicer and less cruel to the animals, to lower my, as it were, cruelty and ecological footprint on this world by not eating animals. So that's, against Bal Tashchis, and it's also minimizing harm to animals, which is a big thing in the Chumash. We've got so many halachot about when to feed your animal, how to muzzle your animal, not to muzzle your animal, if you're going to use an animal to pull a plow, all these things. There's so many laws surrounding that, and for anybody to come and, because of Western society, think that the Torah somehow ordains their steak sandwich and then their sausage dinner, and point to that. I think they're disconnected, and I think that's a result not of being in touch with Torah values. I think it's the opposite. I think it's being in touch with Western values, Fatkins, Atkins, and all these proteinaholics and industry marketing. Yes, there is the idea of elevating an animal through proper shchita and bracha and kavana, and then using that food to give sustenance and vitality to us and then to serve Hashem. But then I question, are we really serving Hashem today? And all the process that happened before the animal was brought to shchita and after it's brought to shchita, and what it's doing to you physically and doing to the environment, I don't know how we can reconcile that. And then if at the end of that you're just on Twitter being a schmuck and not being nice and productive and not calling your mum, call your mum, say good day, say good Shabbos, call your grandma, then are we really serving Hashem? And are we really doing that animal justice? These are the questions we need to live with. And do you need to be eating the steak sandwich and the sausage dinner? I don't think so. I don't think it's good. I don't think it's going to be good for one's health long term. I don't think it's going to be good for the planet long term. So we should abstain from these things, and it's certainly not good for the poor animal in the whole process. I think we need to become sensitized to these things. I think, and bear in mind, I came to this movement kicking and screaming. I was a big meat eater. I laughed at the book Judaism and Vegetarianism because my wife was a vegetarian. She had the book, and I'll talk more about my transition to veganism another time. But I've looked at the facts, I've looked at the science, I've looked at the Torah, and I've reconciled it all. And this is the path of life that my wife and I have chosen. She went from vegetarianism to veganism. It's not always easy. It's hard with kids, that's for sure. That's another video in itself, what we do with our kids. We're more flexible with them, they're more flexitarian. But this is the lifestyle we've chosen. I think it's fully compatible with the Torah. I think it's even endorsed with the Torah. Looking at the forest as well as the trees, the big picture of the Torah. As for wine and bread, find what works for you. Find the bread that you think is the healthiest, and eat the measured amount, the kazayas. It's not that much, it's like probably that much, but a slice or so. And wine, have the little reveres, bit of wine's not bad. I wanted to finish on that note of wine and bread. And then you can do grape juice, of course, or another beverage if you're against grapes. So the idea of bread and wine, it's not only that they're important. I think it's what also that they symbolize. What's symbolized in bread and wine, as opposed to a whole natural food that hasn't been processed, is that there is a need for processing. There is a need for refining, and we see that with the bread, where the wheat is harvested or the grain is harvested, and then it's threshed, and the whole process that's going on there, from go to woe to the grinding, and then to the baking and kneading, and there's a lot of refining. And the same with the wine. You got to take the grapes, you got to squeeze them, then you got to filter them, then you got to ferment them. All these distilling processes, not distilling, but filtration. So there's a lot going on there, and this is, as it were, an allegory for the work that we have to do on our soul and the work that we have to do out in the world to refine it. And also, these processes require cooperation. They require partnership. The baker is not necessarily the same guy as the harvester, and the kneader is not the same guy as the guy who lights the oven or chops the wood or provides the gas to fuel the oven. So the whole process of bread and the whole process of winemaking requires many people along the way, many steps, many involvements, many partners. This is our mission in life, to involve the many partners in that are out there in creation to make a better future, a better now, a better present. So that's, I think, the message of bread and wine, and why we sit down on Shabbat and Yom Tov and partake of these things. These are things that have been refined, involved many people who have cooperated in the process to bring it to the table, as it were. And another last point is, historically, the bread that we're eating of wheat, historically in ancient Israel, it probably would be made out of barley. That was the main crop of the region. Wheat came a lot later. That's I read this great book. I've got the name. Some chef, Gil something or other. He wrote a vegetarian Jewish cookbook. Very interesting, looking at the history of the ingredients. So it probably would have been barley. So you don't have to eat wheat bread. You could eat spelt bread, oat bread, whatever the 7 species, rye bread, whatever. Find your bread, and then own it. And yeah, I don't eat bread during the week either. So see it on Shabbos and enjoy it. Anyway, yalla bye. Keep the questions coming. I'll do my best to pump out videos. It's now summer here in Australia. Today was the birth of a Jew in Bethlehem Day, behind the green line. So we celebrate the historical connection of Jews to Judea and Samaria, and everybody goes shopping. So Merry Xmas to all the viewers, Happy Holidays, Happy Hanukkah for last week, and Happy New Year. Wishing you all the best. Yalla bye.